Hello, everyone. Welcome to Session Zero. I'm Lincoln L. Hayes. We're back after a brief hiatus that was the month of January because I got tired. I'll be honest. I got tired and I needed a break. But here we are. We're back. This is episode 8. I got a great group of veteran players and dungeon masters. You don't need to hear any more from me, so let's just welcome everybody to the show! Yes! That's what I was hoping for. We did it. All right, we got some familiar faces. We got a new face. I recruited somebody from a friend's podcast because that's just how I do stuff. But let's go around before we get started, though. Everybody got your D20? Obviously you do. We're D&D players, so let's all roll initiative. 17. Ooh.
19.
19.
Damn.
Sorry, Erika.
Ooh, roll
Tied.
off.
Twinsies.
Twinsies.
Philip.
8.
Oh, Philip's last.
15.
All right. Eric and Dan, roll off.
Guess what I rolled on my second roll?
No.
It's a
Nat 20, baby.
I got a 3, so I guess you win this time, Ensign.
Okay. First up, her second appearance since the first episode, which in our timeline just dropped. That's how
It was
time
amazing.
works.
Mhm.
Welcome back to the show, Erika Ensign. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be back. I am excited to nerd out about D&D again.
Wonderful. And y'all can't see it at home. Well, actually you can because I put it up. But Erika has been playing circa 22 years.
22-ish years. That's if I'm correct about when I actually started, and if I'm correct about what year it is now.
Who knows? Next up, new to the show, a fellow Total Party Kill member, Mr. Dan Moran. Welcome to the show, Dan.
Hi, thanks for having me, Lincoln. I feel old now by being a veteran, a wily veteran, I hope.
Well, you know, we need veterans for
That's true.
important things like that. And you've been playing for about 30 years.
Yeah, there's some on and off in there, but my
course.
earliest games were definitely about 30 years ago, so still going, though.
Dude, going strong. Got
Going
a
strong.
podcast.
Still alive,
And
yeah.
several games within your podcast, which is what I love about Total Party Kill. And I just got to say it, I'm 36. So I was 6 when you started playing. I didn't even
I'm only
I didn't
40.
Even know.
I'm only 40, so I wasn't that much older.
That's true. But I didn't even know about Dungeons and Dragons, I think, until middle school. But we'll get into that. Next, coming back onto the show for, as I said before we started recording, almost as many times as I've been on this show, Jessica Ayers. Welcome back, Jess.
That's me. Hi.
And you've been playing for about 12 years.
Yeah, again, kind of like what Dan said, or Erika said, if I remember what year I actually started and whatever year this is.
Yeah. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I have played more than 2.5 years because there was time in there, but it's not enough to even be 3 years because it was a little bit here and then 2 games there. And what are you going to do?
Sure.
And lastly, back on the show for, I think, close to the third most frequent appearances on the show, Philip Krogmeier. Welcome back, Philip.
Thank you, Lincoln. Good to be back.
14 years, huh?
Yeah, thereabouts. Started really playing freshman year of college.
Nice. Oh my God, that was... Ugh. To think about that just makes my brain hurt. It's like, that was like 4 years ago, right?
Right.
2004? 2003?
Yeah.
Totally.
No big deal.
Math checks out.
All right. Because we rolled initiative this time, I just want to give credit where credit is due to Pungeon Master Alexander Stein for telling me that I should gamify this Dungeons and Dragons show with dice, which why I didn't think of that to begin
Who
with. I don't
likes
know.
games?
Exactly.
Or dice.
Or dice.
All right. Speaking of, I got a D6 here. There are 5 of us. I'm going to get rid of the 6. Let's see who gets the first question. Jessica. I rolled a 1.
Oh my God, that's me.
What initially brought you to Dungeons and Dragons?
What initially brought me to Dungeons and Dragons? My memory may be a little fuzzy because years. I think I started in 2008-ish, maybe 2009. So it was like right after the recession. I was unemployed, had lots of debt, real shitty time in my life. And my friends were like, you know what? Everything sucks. Let's play Dungeons and Dragons. And I was like, what's Dungeons and Dragons? I've never played. I have heard of this game, but I have never played it. And so we, a friend of ours ran a one shot essentially to kind of introduce me to how the game mechanics work. And I think we were using 3rd edition. It might have been 3.5. I can't remember. But I just fell in love because it was this awesome escape, and we were playing together. We weren't like competing against each other. We were like doing something together, and it was just the best possible escape for just that shitty year.
For sure. And speaking of falling in love 12 years ago, that's when I met my wife.
Oh, gross.
I know, isn't it? I rolled a 5. So Dan, question to you. What brought you to Dungeons and Dragons?
I think it was probably a mixture of things, but I'm going to lay the blame squarely on my eldest cousin's husband, who is has been gaming even longer than me. And he got me into it because he was super into D&D. And I remember very early on in the probably late 80s, early 90s, I started for a little while collecting. D&D had trading cards for a little while. This is before like trading card games were a thing. They were like literally like baseball cards, but for D&D. And I definitely started collecting those around 5th or 6th grade. And I think it was around that time I also sort of discovered, I was given this thing called the Black Box, which was a box set that came out around that time that had like an adventure in it and like this sort of rules all on these little tabbed folder and all the little stand-ups you could make. And I dragooned a whole bunch of my relatives into playing one summer when I was on vacation because I was just super excited as about, a 10 or 11-year-old to just come up. I loved fantasy stuff. I loved reading fantasy. So it seemed like a natural progression to just sort of jump into that. Although now thinking back, I think I must credit at least some of it probably to the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon, which was also running around that time, which I definitely remember watching. So I think that combination of factors just sort of was like, this is the best thing ever. And it's something as a nerd that I could literally spend all of my time learning everything about because there was book upon book about it and just like all the rules and had dice. And it's like, this is basically my dream come true as a 10-year-old, literally everything I could want.
And I had that in my 30s.
You're never too old or too young.
That's right. I rolled a 2, so I'm next. I came to the game through former guest on the show, Chris D'Amato, who was on with Erika on the first episode. I had seen it, and I think there was an episode of Community that they played Dungeons and Dragons, and I was like, I really think that I would like this. And it was one of those things where people who had played it were like, how have you never played D&D? That seems right up your alley. And we started with 3.5. We played exactly 2 games, and then that was it because 2 of our players just never scheduled again. And then I didn't play again until like 2015 or actually 2017. And then we played monthly for about 5 months. And then I moved back here and started a game about 2.5 years ago with my longest running group. I already rolled you, Jess. There is no 6. That's me again. That's me again.
Damn it, randomness.
Okay. Whew. Erika, roll a 4. How did you come to Dungeons and Dragons?
So Dan started playing D&D when he was 10. I wanted to start playing D&D when I was 10. When I was 10 years old, I was in 5th grade, and they separated our reading classes out into based on your reading level. So you'd split into different classrooms. And I was in the almost highest reading group, but there was an even higher reading group that was just 4 boys who sat in the special table off to the side. And the first time I ever heard of D&D was when they would basically spend most of their reading class just playing D&D because Mr. Choinsky thought that was a good enough, because there's a lot of reading involved and some math. And I was like, this sounds amazing. I wish I could do that. Quick prequel, in 2nd grade, when they first split off those reading groups, it was the super high reading group was just 2 boys named Mike. And later the Mikes had 2 other boys. later found out that my second grade teacher told my parents, yeah, I thought about moving Erika into the highest reading group, like I really wanted, but I was really afraid that she wouldn't she wouldn't get the most out of it being the only girl. So
Come on.
I didn't start playing Dungeons and Dragons when I was 10 because of the patriarchy. So
Tear it down.
I'm
Smash it.
so mad. Still.
Smash the patriarchy. Let Erika play D&D.
So cut to 10 years later, I had graduated from college, but was still living in a house with like 8 roommates, all of whom were guys, most of whom were nerds. And yeah, one of them was just like, he'd been playing D&D forever, and he's like, do you want to play? And I was like, I thought you'd never ask. So, and he was like just using his own made up campaign setting and stuff, but that was my first experience, and I absolutely fell in love. And some of the people that he then had playing with us were also DMs. So then I found myself falling into other games and was playing multiple times a week for quite a long time.
Excellent.
And then I moved to Canada and had to find a podcast.
Which you did. And lastly, Philip, how did you find yourself in a dungeon with a dragon?
Well, first off, quick question, Erika, do they not just like automatically give you a podcast when you get to Canada? I just
I'm not supposed to tell, but yes.
It's part of their healthcare system, I think.
It is. It's good for mental health.
I definitely wanted to start playing earlier because I grew up in a bookstore. I grew up reading, Lord of the Rings and all of those things. But Lincoln and I grew up in a really small town, and
2,500 people.
Well, now, but there wasn't really anybody around who knew how to play D&D, who would willingly talk about it in public anyway. So freshman year of college, I am hanging out with a bunch of engineering nerds, and a couple of the guys who live on my floor are like, hey, let's start a campaign. Like, I'm in. I've never played before. Let's do this. So that would have been fall of 2006, and we were starting with a 3-5 campaign running Red Hand of Doom.
Excellent. Remind me how far apart we are, Philip. Are we 3 years apart?
3 years, yeah.
Man, if only we had known then, because you know who would have probably played with us? Mick Jeanette.
Oh God, yeah.
All the guys who were playing Magic the Gathering.
All our
theater
guys. We would have had games going backstage. It would have been terrible.
And then Clark, rest in peace, would have come backstage and yelled at us, been like, "Stop! Rolling dice! Get on stage!
What are you doing? You're on."
You missed your cue again. All right, that actually leads perfectly into the next question, which is going to go to you, good sir. You mentioned that you weren't sure how folks in good old Holyoke, Colorado would take Dungeons and Dragons as, coming out of the satanic panic, because Colorado, where we were in Colorado, it was kind of the 80s into about the mid 90s. So I think the satanic panic probably hit when we were starting kindergarten. How has the perception of the game changed since you've been playing these past 14 years?
Honestly, it has just been a pop culture wave. All of the real play podcasts that have taken off, the kind of celebrities embracing it. You get people like Vin Diesel and Stephen Colbert talking about playing their games of D&D. It's just gotten to the point where the people who played D&D are more popular now and are able to kind of bring with them their love of this thing that had been not necessarily frowned upon, but not encouraged either for a very long time. And even just with the launch of 5th edition, we saw another massive wave of popularity kind of take the game again.
For sure. And it helps when guys like Joe Manganiello and Vin Diesel, as you mentioned, are playing D&D, because then it's like, you mean the guys that were gonna beat me up? Yeah. They want to play with me now?
Handsome people play D&D now.
Jess, how have you noticed the change in your time?
When I was like probably 7 or 8, kind of like Erika, I heard about D&D and was like Dungeons and Dragons, what's that? That sounds cool. And I didn't know what it was, and I like tried to ask my parents, and they're like, oh, it's some game from the 70s. And I was like, okay, that doesn't help me, but I would ask the kids at school if they knew what it was. They're like, yeah, losers and nerds play that. And I was like, oh, okay, but it sounds cool. And they're like, no, it's not, it's stupid. So that was like my first introduction to what Dungeons and Dragons is.
Kids are the worst.
They are. They really are.
Ugh.
Hate them. But I have noticed, probably because of the popularity of Critical Role, the Adventure Zone, Dimension 20, and then of course Joe Manganiello, who, by the way, is really beautiful and sweet in person. I bought the like collector's edition Dungeons and Dragons art coffee table book, which I don't have it with me, but it's in the other room. But I went to it. He was doing a signing at one of our local game shops. So we went and got it signed, and he is just delightful. Anyway, sidebar. But I think because of like really cool celebrities like that being like, oh yeah, I play Dungeons and Dragons. What of it? You want to fight about it?
Where's your D20?
Yeah, let's do it.
I got to tell you, I was teased on Halloween because I took a D20 because it matched my outfit.
Aww.
And I took it to my friend's house who play D&D with me. And they're like, nerd. And I was like, yes. I'm your DM. Roll initiative, you dick.
They were probably calling you a nerd for just for the color coordination. It had nothing to do with Dungeons and Dragons.
Exactly.
It was fashion.
Fashion nerd. Ugh. But yeah, I've noticed that sort of shift in my own personal experience. It used to be when I'm like, oh, I play Dungeons and Dragons, or I'm interested in Dungeons and Dragons, people are like, really? But now it's more of a curiosity. If I'm like, oh, I play Dungeons and Dragons, people are like, oh, I've heard about that. What is it? And so it's more of a curiosity versus like hostility now.
That's nice. It's no longer judged. It's more like, huh, what's that?
Exactly.
Very good. Erika, how about you?
Yeah, well, in 1987, it was a weird thing that the Weird Boys did, like off on the side of the reading classroom. I mean, it was known. I grew up just north of Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, which is like one of the birthplaces of Dungeons and Dragons. So it wasn't like completely unheard of. But yeah, you mentioned the Satanic Panic, and I remember even in college after I hadn't started playing at that time, but I was in college. This ghost researcher was doing a lecture at a church.
Hold on.
Was the researcher a ghost, or were they researching ghosts? This is an important point.
Very true.
Good question.
That's
an
important distinction.
Yes. No, it was, as far as I know, the fellow himself was not a ghost, but he was researching ghost stories. And there was an at the time fairly famous haunting that happened in the middle of Wisconsin. Wisconsin had a lot of hauntings. And this particular one, I don't know, had a Ouija board and there was a fire. And anyway, this guy, this was one of his life's work, was investigating this. And one of my friends who was a D&D nerd, he was one of the mics from the upper reading group. So he was like, yeah, we got to go to this lecture. I'm like, sure, I'll go along with you. So I went along, and it was, interesting, I guess, hearing about the ghost research. But then he started going, like the speaker started going on this tangent about like how things like Ouija boards are terrible because they're letting Satan into the souls of our children. And also we should be very careful of Dungeons and Dragons because there are spells and stuff. And my friend Mike stood up and started arguing with the guy in the middle of this church, which was kind of amazing. That was the first time that I had actually realized that there were people who were super against Dungeons and Dragons. Up until that time, I had just thought of it as like it was a nerd pursuit and people thought it was weird. But yeah, there were definitely people who were vehemently not okay with it at all. It seems like there's still some of that out there in certain corners of the United States mostly. But yeah, for the most part, I think.
Wait, our puritanical society is against a game that's about magic and fantasy?
Yep. Fancy that. But yeah, I agree with Jess that it has definitely changed, and it's much more known and more like, people still that I work with still think that it's a little bit of a weird nerdy thing that I play Dungeons and Dragons on a podcast, but they also think it's a weird nerdy thing that I do podcasts in general. So that gives you an idea where they're coming from. So it's like they're calling me nerd with a smile instead of with a nasty frown. That's the difference.
It's more of a, oh, you're a nerd, as opposed to you're a nerd and then throwing you in a dumpster.
Exactly.
So we call that progress.
Indeed.
And Dan, how about you?
Yeah, it's changed a lot. I mean, I was lucky enough to I grew up outside of Boston, and I was lucky enough to have a good group of people who I played D&D with who were like all my friends. And we were sort of insulated because we had our little nerd clique in middle school where we had all our different clubs. Like we had a club for playing board games, and we had a club for playing D&D, and we had all these different, like a newspaper club, etc. And they all eventually morphed into some form of like a RPG club over time, like tapes left in your glove compartment that eventually turned into Freddie Mercury, I believe. I think that it was really nice to have that because I felt insulated from that. Like, even though I knew intellectually that this was something that other people were going to make fun of me about, it never really got to the point of having that impact on me, because I also grew up in an area that I think really prized, like being smart, essentially. And so even if there were different nerds, everyone in our school, like, it often felt like it was just different types of nerds. So, you would have the math nerds and the theater nerds and the intellectual, competitive nerds and stuff like that. And yeah, we have people who played sports and stuff like that. But because so much of that was prized, it was not as stratified, I feel like, as like the high school that I would see when I watch TV shows about high school. So that was lucky. And I never really felt too much like it was something that I got judged or picked on for any more than any of my other super nerdy pursuits. But despite that, it has definitely evolved in recent years to become this thing that is almost mainstream. I mean, if anything, in the history of me playing like D&D and RPG stuff, I felt that the most pressure and judgment against D&D actually came from like my friends who were super into like other RPGs and like indie RPGs. And they'd be like, D&D, it's too mainstream. It's so many dice and tables. No,
you're such a poser, man.
Exactly,
you've been playing that. You're a conformist.
Yeah, you like D&D? Name 3 classes. No, it's
okay.
That's pretty easy. No, I ended up playing a whole bunch of other RPGs in like my early 20s because I had friends who were super into it, and like D&D had kind of fallen by the wayside then. But like, yeah, I think it's really had this amazing renaissance, and I think it tracks a lot towards things like video games. I mean, if you remember back, similar stuff with video games being really derided for like, oh, what effect is this having on our children? And I'm like, sooner or later, literally everybody who will be in our government will have grown up playing video games because they're that popular. Everybody plays video games, and it's not quite that widespread with something like D&D, but it's pretty close. Like all the people who were like, nerds and couldn't find anybody to play D&D with them when they were kids, like are now like, oh, it's okay that I like this thing. This is great. So I don't have the same experience with Erika, mainly because like 90% of my friends are people I play D&D with. So like, that's just something that we do. That's just like our social activity. Like people going, I don't know what other social activities people do. I was going to say going and kicking a ball around or playing some base. Is that a thing that people do as a hobby? I don't really understand.
Well, right now I have no social life. So D&D is my social life.
Perfect.
So, yes.
The way it should be.
Jess, you had a follow-up.
Oh, I just wanted to salute Dan on his Good Omens reference.
Thank you.
Next question. This one's going to go to Erika. You mentioned the ghost hunter in the church. Did you have any other awkward encounters in your 20 plus years of people just being aggressive or really judgmental about you playing D&D that you had to be like, I'm gonna walk away. This is an uncomfortable situation, or even just a funny one, if there wasn't anything that's scary.
No, that one just honestly takes the cake. I can't even remember if we got kicked out. I'm pretty sure we left early. So there's nothing that could possibly compare to that. I think over the years, there's just sort of like this miasma of people being like, you're a girl and you play Dungeons and Dragons, because, in the 90s, you still got a lot of that. But I was lucky enough that actually the groups that I played in, I was almost never the only girl. I was usually about half and half. So it was a nice balance. So I think kind of, especially at that time, I was a lot like Dan, where I ran in circles where that's just what we did. And there were, everybody that I knew played D&D. So I was lucky enough not to not to get any pushback. Thank goodness.
Wonderful. And Daenerys decided she wanted to be in this episode.
Cats are a big part of Dungeons, at least in my experience playing Dungeons and Dragons.
When did she start playing D&D?
At least half of my D&D
ago.
experiences were in a house with at least one cat. So
Yeah, that seems right.
Mhm.
We got two. The other one is quietly off camera, which is always good. Dan, how about you?
I can't think. I was trying to rack my brain if I ever had a really awkward experience. And like, I mean, the most awkward experience I had was probably that aforementioned time where I co-opted a bunch of my relatives into playing D&D with me when I was like a 10-year-old. Cause I was like invariably that 10-year-old with like, when my parents had like friends over and they're having a nice dinner party, I would like come downstairs with literally a stack of board games being like, what are we going to play? And my parents like, it's not that kind of party. But most
it's a key party, Dan. Go away. You don't want to be involved in this.
Most of my relatives, although nerdy in their own ways, are not D&D people, but like they're super game people. Like they're always willing to try anything. And so they saw how excited I was about it. And they're like, sure, yeah, like we'll learn how to play this game. And so it was not an ideal situation. And like everyone was very, willing to give it a try. But I could easily tell that most of those people just were like, wait, I am an elf. Okay, like how does this work? And it's like, all right, maybe this is the wrong group for that. So yeah, other than that, I can't remember. I'm sure I got called nerd a few times, but I don't know. I was just always having too much fun to care. I gotta be honest.
I think that's a big part of it too. And I think the older we get, we're just like, I don't give a shit. But like Philip was saying, and I'm going to throw it to you next, Philip, that when you're kids, you worry about that. You don't want people to think that you're a weirdo nerd who is in his basement worshiping Satan. Unless you do. I mean, that's your own choice too. But Philip, what have you... Okay. Nah. No, there's a cat on my shoulder. I'm just going to censor
I think
here.
The closest thing I ever got to kind of that awkward situation, one of my older sisters freaking out because she thought I was going to end up as like a LARPer. I think that was like her big panic.
Oh no,
because
that would be so terrible.
she saw all of the SCA kids running around on her college campus and was like, oh my God, please tell me you're not going to be one of those guys.
Well, because I know your sisters, I need to know which sister.
Oh, Diana.
There it is.
No, but then I guess the other kind of most awkward situation. So in college, we living in the residence halls at UCCS, we had floor lounges. And so that was like the space we had where we could all actually fit in and play a game of D&D. So just explaining to like every new security guard who came across us as we were playing what we were doing, and that we were in fact residents, that we lived there, that we were not breaking into the building to just hang out and play D&D.
Because God forbid you see a bunch of kids sitting around a table with graph paper and pencils and dice, and you're like, wait a minute, what are you doing?
They could have been planning a bank heist or something.
That's
well,
that's just an all-road campaign.
But it was in Neverwinter.
Where's Neverwinter? Is that? Are you? Someone call somebody. And Jess, how about you? Anything weird in your life of D&D playing?
The weirdest thing probably was I was at the liquor store. This was probably like 4 years ago.
I love this story already.
Yeah, so I was at the liquor store. I was at Bevmo, and I was buying whatever I was, a beer or whatever. And I think I was wearing my Critical Role hoodie, and the guy checking me out noticed it. He was like, "Oh, you like Critical Role?" And so we started talking about Critical Role, which was cool. But then he kind of got all like gatekeepery and snarky about it suddenly, just out of nowhere. It was really weird. I don't remember exactly what he said, but he was like, "So do you just watch the show? Please tell me you at least play," or something like that. It was kind of uncomfortable. And I was like, really? Like, I was completely shocked that this dude would just say this after like a 30-second interaction. I'm like, I'm giving you money to buy things. Go away.
You should have bought an extra one of those like little bottles of liquor just so you could like splash in his face and then
I'll
stomped
take
out.
one of those.
I'll take a bottle of Grey Goose, please. How dare you?
You want to go for something way cheaper. If you're
Yeah.
Stoli.
Not great.
I mean, how much is a shooter?
What's the
of
most
Grey Goose?
Bernie whiskey
in Canada,
you have?
$7.99.
Yeah, here it's
For a shooter?
yeah, it's $7.99 here too.
Guys, that's why I don't drink vodka.
Ooh, Crystal
Ooh,
Skull
Skull.
vodka, fancy
There you go.
Dan Aykroyd's.
And
But yeah, it was really uncomfortable, and I was like, eh. But I was like, yeah, I do play. I'm like, I play Pathfinder right now, and he was like, well, that's good, and I was like,
You
okay,
passed
and
his
then
test.
he started like trying to ask if I wanted to like join his group, and I was like, no, fucker, I don't.
You were just
I was like,
a
cool, bye.
judgmental prick to me. No, I'm not going to join your game.
Exactly.
Oh.
So that's probably the weirdest interaction that I can remember, like as an adult, because otherwise, yeah, like everyone else said, you just don't care.
Yeah.
I don't care what people's opinions are.
I actually had a very positive interaction recently with one of my new coworkers. I was on a Zoom call and I'd worked there, 4 days, and I was wearing my D20 hat, and we do a weekly check-in. We go around, how's everybody doing? And it can, you can be personal stuff, it can be work stuff, it can be whatever you want, because literally we don't see each other in person. So I was like, my show is going to premiere this week and I'm excited about it. And she, oh, what's your show about? And I was like, oh, it's actually a Dungeons and Dragons show. She goes, oh, I thought it might be. I saw your hat. And it's just the outline of a D20. It doesn't say Dungeons and Dragons or anything, but she recognized it. And I was like, I like you, Mary.
Nice.
We would get along in person if we ever met. Next question, we're going to start with Dan. Excuse you, I already rolled the dice, Daenerys. What keeps you coming back for 30 plus years? What is it about Dungeons and Dragons that just keeps you coming and playing podcast after podcast and games in person and everything else? What is it about this game that you just, and we can do RPGs in general too, because it could be Pathfinder or other games, but what keeps you coming back to the table?
It's a variety of things, but I think most sort of importantly, the thing for me is always just like wanting to like live out these adventures. I think as a kid watching all those shows and reading all those books, you're like, oh, these people are having these awesome adventures. This seems so cool. My life's never like that. And it's about the closest I feel like I can get. I mean, I feel like a lot of my life has distilled down into that, whether it's in writing or in playing D&D or video games or whatever. It's about like, I just want experiences that are fun. And what has enhanced that over the years is the fact that it's something unlike, say, writing, which I do a lot of, which is a very solitary activity. D&D has the social aspect to it. And that's a huge part of it, is that I love getting the chance to interact with people, whether it's my friends who I've been playing long running campaigns with in person and now on Zoom, like every other campaign, or in more recent years doing podcasts and doing like shows about it. Like, it's great to have a time to sort of come together with a bunch of people. And I feel like they're just having an excuse to hang out and a little framework to play around with that and a shared experience. It just is everything. I mean, it for me, it's the most fun pastime that I have, really, because it involves all of these different aspects of creativity and socialness and storytelling, which are all things that I love. So you wrap those all together, and it's just like, I always want to play more. People joke like, oh, there's another campaign. Dan's gonna have to play another campaign. I was like, I literally cannot have too many campaigns. It's just a limitation of how many hours there are in the day right now.
Amen, brother. And as a DM and a writer, I feel the same way. It's like super fun to sit down. I just finished writing a new adventure for one of my games, but then it's like, well, I can't do anything with this by myself. I need my people. I need my group. Erika, same question to you. What keeps you coming back?
That is something that's actually evolved a lot over the years, because when I first started playing, the thing that kept me coming back was just I got to be involved in something. I was incredibly shy and I didn't have a lot of friends, and I just wanted people to pay attention to me and let me hang out and be part of the gang. So when I first started, I pretty much only played characters that were very taciturn and didn't say a lot. Also in part because I was super nervous, like I didn't know what I was doing, and I felt like that nervousness of being the only girl, which I was the only girl in the very first campaign. So for a lot of years, I just played the most basic vanilla characters possible. And it was just, I get to hang out with people that I think are cool and have a good time every week or two. And as the years have gone on, I've sort of morphed a little bit more towards what Dan was saying. Like I didn't care as much about the adventures in the first place. I was just excited to be with people. And now I am like, I've somewhere along the line learned a lot about how the game works. So I'm not nervous about that part of it anymore. So now I feel like I am comfortable playing characters that are a little more complicated and doing actually more role playing, which is something that I did not do any actual like role playing early on because I was just too scared. So now the ability to just, be a jerk sometimes or which I don't do that a lot in my normal life, or just be extra fun and like annoyingly chipper and happy. Like these are things. It's fun it's still about the other people at the table though for me, because it's about getting the reaction from people. The things that I think about when somebody says like, what do you love about D&D? The thing that jumps to my mind first are like the ridiculous quotes from around the gaming table, like never spit in a bathtub. Like I don't even know what that's attached to anymore, but those words are, I'm pretty sure it was a mimic. I'm not entirely certain.
It's always a mimic.
It's usually
Right.
a mimic.
It's always a mimic. Are you a mimic?
Like,
you have to tell me.
Yes, that's the law.
it is.
The whole tavern is a mimic.
Shit.
That's the worst.
That's terrifying.
So yeah, it's really just about having a good time with people and the ridiculous things that happen.
It's so funny to hear you talk about your early days playing, because I only know you as a player on TPK, and everybody's class. You know everything in this game. Like I was just listening to one of your episodes, and you have a rogue in your party, and you're like, oh, can't you do sneak attack or something? And it was just like, of course Erika knows that. Of course Erika knows all of these things. And I feel you on the stories around the table. And the only downside is that the stories are isolated to that group of friends. Like it's not a shared experience that you can be like, remember that time? Because then people are like, what? What are you talking about?
Well, you know what?
Like, oh, right, that was in D&D.
Yeah, you were in a dungeon?
Actually there. I wasn't actually there for the bathtub thing. That was something that happened before I had even joined the group, and they just kept bringing that line up so many times that it became part of my own like gaming culture. So, it can be passed on, but it has to be in the right circumstances.
For sure. Philip, how about you? Brings you back.
That adventure, that sheer variety, never knowing exactly what's going to happen when you sit down at the table, getting the chance to have those experiences with your friends, to get to make new friends, to get to kill your old friends. It has been one of the most formative experiences in my life outside of like actual theater. It's the closest thing I've found to that kind of bonding experience that you get when you're, doing a play or a musical with somebody else.
Yeah, Jess can attest to this. Not having any theater or television or film that we could be doing right now, where do you think I pull out all my voices and I get to play different characters? Yeah, exactly. I feel that. And Jess, what keeps you coming back?
I don't know that I can add much more to this on top of what everyone else has said, but yeah, as a kid, I always wanted to go on an adventure. And as an adult, I've been on adventures and I don't like them. So not in real life. I like when you're playing a game and you're like, where are we going to sleep tonight? Guess we're going to camp. That's not fun in real life. In the game, totally cool. But in real life, I don't know where we're going to sleep tonight. we're in a foreign country. Well, shit. So
That's very stressful.
that's very stressful. But
You
in
don't
a
get
game,
survival checks in real life.
Does
exactly.
anyone
No
speak
good.
the language?
Right.
All I've got is
Anyone speak
Elvish. Yeah.
Why did I learn Abyssal? Ah!
Right. Exactly. I have literally said that exact phrase. Why did I learn Abyssal in game? But yeah, just the adventure. You get to go on an adventure. It's great. And then you get to do it with your friends. And you don't actually physically have to go anywhere. It's just it's really lovely. And lately, because kind of like Erika said, her experiences and reasons she comes back has evolved. And I can say the same for me, that now I'm really interested in exploring different like parts of my own personality. So like making a character, making charisma the dump stat and just being real awkward is super fun. Or making a character that's super charismatic but has like a temper and like flies off the handle, like exploring expression of anger in like to use a really lame term, but a safe space.
It's not lame. That's absolutely apt, and I completely agree with you. I find that as well, of like, how can I play with different parts of myself with the NPCs that I play, or in the game where I'm a player, like crew is kind of a shit, and I'm constantly kind of checking myself in game to be like, is this too much? Am I railroading? And I'm also the most experienced player of that game, so I have to constantly be like, okay, don't do too much. Make sure you're talking to everybody. But like, that's the game where I convinced the shopkeeper to give us a bag of holding for like a couple hundred gold because we were going to do street team for him. We got a bag of holding at like level 2 because I just talked the guy up. And I would never do that in real life. I'm very uncomfortable with confrontation and talking to people.
Haggling? No, thank you. I do not want to haggle.
How much is an oil change? $3,000? Of course. Here you go.
Sure, right.
I will not contest this. Of course not. Believe it or not, folks, we're coming to our last question of the night. Thank you all for being here. I could do this show for 2 hours, but then that would be too long of a show. So, last question to the group. It's going to Dan first. What is your favorite thing in D&D? It can be a spell, an item, a creature, anything you want. What is your favorite thing in D&D?
I have to say, I think my favorite thing is anything that causes a little bit of chaos in a group. So specifically the thing that popped to mind. Erika's played with me a lot. The deck of many things, I think, is the one I would pull out because it's terrible, but it's also amazing because just it's so huge things can happen and yet they're totally unpredictable and chaotic and it could be totally terrible. I'm not sure it's ever actually come up in play, but it's something that I, just constantly love joking about. But anything that's an item like that, I've got a character in a campaign right now that has like the robe of useful things, or the playing like a chaos sorcerer with wild magic table and having to be like, random stuff's gonna happen now. I enjoy that because it fosters that whole like, basically anything can happen and you don't know what's around the next corner.
I love the wild magic table as well. I have Ellen, who was on the most recent episode that y'all have seen. She is a paladin sorcerer multiclass and she has wild magic. And now that we're in Barovia, she found a Barovian wild magic table. And she's like, a lot of these are just gross. And I was like, great. I can't wait. We were fighting some blights and she failed 2 of her rolls. She grew a useless appendage out of her back.
Oh no.
And then she grew a face on the back of her head. And I made, she's like, it's a useless face that doesn't work. I was like, oh no, that face does this all the time. Constantly. And she's like, cool. As soon as we can, I need some lesser restoration right now. So yeah, I love the wild magic table. And the Tasha's Cauldron of Everything wild magic is some crazy stuff too, so I look forward to more of that. Next is Jess. What's your favorite?
That's me. I'm a bit of a dice goblin who is growing into a dice dragon. So maybe it's dumb, but my favorite thing is dice. I fucking love dice. This is my dice bag, and it is bursting at the seams. I have had to transfer some older dice to other places of storage, but yeah, I have a fuckload of dice. Yep. Dice are my favorite. Dice are my favorite. I love
Very
them.
good. You commented on the first episode of the show and suggested an episode about dice, and I said, I'm writing that down, and it's on the list of future
Yes!
episodes because what is it about dice? I need to get into the mind of players and figure out why we love dice so much.
It's a sickness. It really is.
It's a blessing.
Exactly. Erika, you're next.
Well, okay, Jess already said dice, so that's covered. Like, I literally have a thing of lucky bamboo in a clear vase that has dice instead of rocks. That's the
That's awesome.
in the other room.
I love it. I'm stealing that idea.
Do it, take it. I stole it from somebody
Seriously,
else.
that's fabulous.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It was like these dice are either ones that I think are kind of ugly or ones that I will never use again because they're associated with a character that is now departed. And yeah, and I buy dice for a new character. It's probably not fiscally responsible. So I'm gonna instead I'm gonna say the concept of an animal companion I think is just great because there's so much possibility there for very cool things like, you know, day saving moments or really ridiculous stuff. So like my very first character in the second campaign that I played was a ranger, and she had two I don't know if they were giant weasels, but they were bigger than normal weasels, named Sid and Nancy. And they and like they kept this wasn't me, this was the DM. They kept untying my bootlaces and like I would trip in the middle of a battle. So then I started coating my bootlaces with pepper so that they wouldn't do that. And then they would do it anyway, and then they would just sneeze. So then they became called the Sneasels instead of the Weasels. And like just like stories like that. And in our current Curse of Strahd campaign, my paladin has summoned a steed, so I have a celestial pony that just thinks the rest of the players in the campaign are just really too extra, and he's not for it. So every once in a while that comes out, and it's just hilarious. So yeah, I like being able to have like that little extra. It's like that's not my character, but it's like an adjunct to my character that adds a little bit of spice, sometimes literally.
That campaign is full of animal companions. Literally,
It sure is.
More than 50% of the party has an animal companion.
True. It's true.
It's a little. It is a lot.
And that's why it's the Dog and Pony Show.
Indeed.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
My wife has a pet goat, her druid, in our campaign, and it just stays in the house, but it really doesn't like our paladin sorcerer character. Just cause like she had a wild magic where she could only speak to and understand animals, and she tried to talk to the goat, and the goat just was not having her. She failed her charisma, and the goat was just like and then in our other game, our druid rescued a basilisk hatchling and named him Cyclops. And he's kind of fallen by the wayside in story, but I made him like goggles so he can look at people without petrifying them. And I love animal companions. Jess, you had a follow-up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Erika, I love that you had weasels because I think my very first druid character that I made had a dire weasel for her animal companion because my DM was very kind, and I was like, this is the greatest, and unfortunately he died.
No,
it was real
That's the
traumatic.
scary part.
It was real traumatic, but yeah, weasels are good.
Philip, what keeps you coming back to D&D?
Favorite thing D&D wise is probably the I've been sitting here trying to think of things, but it's like the thing that I keep coming back to with like every character that I build is the handy haversack. It is one of the single most useful magical items, and I will almost always buy one as soon as my character's got enough gold for it, because it's kind of like the bag of holding, except whatever you need is right there on top when you reach in to grab it. And, you know, I had a character nearly get killed over one at one point. It was a bad time, but that, and then I, as far as not like just items or spells or things, I love coming up with like finding new character classes. going through like 3.5 and Pathfinder, my friends and I would try out all of the obscure character classes that we could track down, and we would try combining them in different ways with different things just to see what kind of combinations we could get going. Like I had a rogue barbarian that fought with a very large hammer, but would still get sneak attack
Genius.
So yeah.
Excellent.
Those are coming up with fun class and ability combinations is one of my favorite things about D&D.
Wonderful. Well, ladies and germs, that is episode 8 of Session 0. Thank you all for being here. Before we go, though, we must do plugs. This episode will be dropping on the 5th of February, so put on your future caps and think about what might be coming up and give us your social media if you want to be found on the social medias. We'll start with Jess.
Oh boy, that's me. I'm Jess. I am on a live stream Dungeons and Dragons show called Fables of Refuge, and we try to stream once a week. You know, schedules happen, doesn't always happen, but words, I talk for a living, I swear. My Instagram is at Jess Next Door, no E in next. And if you want to follow Fables, I think we are at Fables Refuge on Twitter.
Fan tab. Philip.
Well, I got my future cap on, so thank you. No, you can find me on Twitter at FlipWriter, all one word. I don't really have a lot of other things going on right now, but by the time this episode drops, I'll be halfway through my master's degree and taking a little bit of time to work on a children's child-friendly project I'm calling Bard and Rogue Are Friends.
Aww.
I love that. And
Sounds
congratulations.
Thank you.
Get that higher education. Erika.
I am on Twitter, probably too much, at HollyGoDarkly. And I am, as has been mentioned, I do a Dungeons and Dragons real play podcast that Dan is also on called Total Party Kill. I have multiple characters and campaigns on there. I'm also on a bunch of other podcasts on the Incomparable Network, and also do a Doctor Who podcast called Verity.
And you won a Hugo Award for the Uncanny Magazine.
Hey,
That's right.
She won many Hugo Awards, let's be clear.
I can't keep up with all of Erika's awards.
It's 5. It's 5.
Jesus.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. And Dan, where can people find you and your projects?
You can find me very boringly on Twitter at dmoran. Not to say I'm boring on Twitter, just a boring handle, apparently. I am on, as Eric said, I'm on Total Party Kill over at the Incomparable on a variety of different campaigns there, as well as several other podcasts on the Incomparable. I'm also an author, so I will plug my books. I've written 3 novels, the most recent of which is The Aleph Extraction. They are sci-fi espionage novels.
They're really good.
Erika's my hype person. She's wearing a shirt. She's wearing swag from my books.
I'm wearing a shirt from Dan's book.
Nice.
That was not on purpose. It just sort of worked out that way.
I appreciate it. Anyways, you can find those. You can find my website at dmoran.com. You can also find the books on Amazon or at your probably local bookstore. Pretty much any place.
That's friggin' great. And before I let you guys go, I just want to know, how do you only play an hour for TPK? How do you do that? Because I thought surely they play like 4 hours and then they just chop it. But no, you guys play an hour and then Tony calls it. And I'm like, how do you?
We used to play 4-hour sessions, and the answer was it was very long and very hard to do and sit in front of a computer for 4 hours. And we were not very good about breaking it up. So we decided.
Also, the editor really hated having to find a place to chop it. So we decided to stop doing that.
Yeah, I will say we will throw inspiration there to the excellent D&D podcast Dragon Friends, based out of Australia, which I think is where we take a lot of our inspiration, especially Tony, our dungeon master, for structuring those episodes.
That's impressive, because my games are 8 to 12 on Fridays and Saturday nights, and then my Wednesday night game is 7 to 9:30, and even that feels super short. So catching back up with where you guys are in Strahd, I was like, wow, this is 55 minutes and he's wrapping it up. That's impressive.
Well, I mean, there's usually like at least a half an hour of nonsense before that, and then usually like 20 at least minutes of nonsense afterwards that
Gotta
are
wind
specifically
down.
related to the
Yeah.
game.
That's right.
But, yeah, so we
I do love
still
that
spend
the
a couple
podcast
hours.
ends and then there's probably 5 more minutes of just fuckery at the end.
Yeah,
That's true.
basically.
I love it. I love it. I'm Lincoln L. Hayes, Lincoln L. Hayes on all the socials. You can follow this show at Session Zero D&D Show on the Instagram. You can find the YouTube channel where you find all these videos. The ones that fit on Instagram TV will be on Instagram. Otherwise, everything will be on YouTube. And you can find everything on my website, lincolnlhayes.com/Session Zero. And if you would like to be a participant of this show, you can go to my website and fill out the survey like Mr. Dan Moran did. And Mr. Tony Sindelar did for next week, and Annette, and a bunch of other people.
Oh, cool.
And hopefully we can get you on at some point. Who knows? I made this show too long and a lot of work for myself, so I have to pull back a little bit because I always do that. Because that's me. But thank you all for being here. This was a delight. And everybody, go play D&D. Because it's fun. Thank you all. Bye-bye. Hey, it's me again. Did that seem like fun? All that D&D talk? Well, I could teach you if you want. Just go to my website, lincolnlhayes.com/storytelling, and take a look. I can teach it a couple hours, run through the basics with you, do a small session, see what you think. I can run it for just you and a couple friends, you and your family, you and some coworkers. What do you got to lose? If you don't like it, it's one night of TV you don't watch. But if you do like it, you have a hobby you could play for the rest of your life. Sounds good to me. Head over to my website, lincolnlhayes.com/storytelling. Let's chat. And thanks for watching Session Zero. See you next week.